Hello, this is Victor Aguilar, your host.
And this is Alex Roth, your other host.
Welcome to another episode of EU Untangled, the podcast explaining EU politics and policies in a simple, no-nonsense way.
Well, at least that's the idea.
In today's episode, we're going to talk about the Spitzenkandidaten. If you don't know what that means, worry not, you're not alone. And this is why we put this episode together for you. Oh, and a short disclaimer. All the opinions we express in this episode are our own and can therefore only be attributed to us. We do not speak on behalf of any organization, individual, or entity. Enjoy today's episode and don't forget to vote in the EU elections taking place on 6 to 9 June 2024.
So Vic, what's up next weekend?
Oh man, so much is up. Just want to get some good rest. I want to do some grocery shopping. Have to do some household chores, long overdue. Really looking forward to that.
Yeah, sounds like a good plan, but I think you might forgot something important.
Is that so?
Yeah, at least here on my calendar it says something here you have to vote.
Oh, this is my first time voting in the EU elections. That's absolutely right. But I had not forgotten about that. That's at the top of my to-do list. I considered that as one of my top tasks for next weekend. Because you're absolutely right. The European elections are going to take place on 6 to 9 June this year. They take place every 5 years. And it's a pretty big deal. Around 360 million citizens in Europe will vote across 27 countries to elect 720 members of the European Parliament. That sounds pretty exciting to me. So EU elections have actually taken place since 1979, and that means that we have had 9 European elections to date. So the one taking place on 6 to 9 June will be the 10th. Mm-hmm. And this is a very big deal because by electing the members of the European Parliament, which is the only EU institution that is directly elected by European citizens, the configuration of a very important part of the EU legislative branch will be put together. And the European Parliament has a number of important functions. It approves or rejects EU legislation, also the EU budget. It has a number of parliamentary committees that also carry out studies. They put out own initiative reports. And the Parliament also helps monitor other EU institutions and promote human rights in Europe and beyond. And crucially, one of the first tasks of the European Parliament is to elect the President of the European Commission, which is the executive branch of the EU and arguably the most powerful EU institution, because it's the one that gets to propose legislation, new laws, new policies for Europe. So the European Parliament does that by absolute majority, so half of the serving MEPs plus one have to vote in favor of a nominee for Commission President. And the interesting thing is how complex this process is, because the Commission President is nominated by the heads of government of EU member states, but then it is elected by the European Parliament. And that's actually the focus of today's episode. We want to understand how this works, especially because since 2014, European parties have introduced a new term into EU lingo, the Spitzenkandidat. And what this means is that each European political party puts forward a quote-unquote lead candidate for the post of Commission President. These candidates are announced in advance. They have to draw up a manifesto, participate in debates, and campaign as if they were official candidates for the position of Commission President. And then, in theory, the candidate of the party that gets the most votes in the EU elections will be the official nominate for the position of Commission President, only to be sort of ratified by the European Parliament. So at least that's the idea. But in practice, this works a bit differently, and that's why we have an episode today. We're going to discuss what the Spitzenkandidat process is, what it isn't, how it works, where it comes from, and why it's actually not what it seems to be. And Alex, if I may, since Spitzenkandidat is a German term, and last time I checked your German, I think you're uniquely suited to explain what this means. You want to give it a go?
Well, Vic, I have to say, first, you already pronounced the word Spitzenkandidat very well.
Thank you.
I see I think you learned German a few years ago. So
I did, and I remember nothing.
That still
but I've been
shimmers through.
practicing my Spitzenkandidat pronunciation.
Well done, well done. Well, the Spitzenkandidat, which is a German term, and I guess most of you can imagine what it means, at least the second part of the word. Kandidat is a candidate, of course, and Spitze means something like a head or the top. So if you put it also into Google Translate, it comes out as a head candidate or top candidate or leading candidate, which is nothing else like typically in the German meaning the top listed candidate of an electoral list. So in many elections, could be on local, regional, or federal level, you have a party puts up a list, and then the top candidate is the Spitzenkandidat, which often then also might be serving as some kind of head of government. Okay, they could be again local, regional, federal. Who knows? For instance, in Germany, the Spitzenkandidat is often then also the Kanzlerkandidat, the chancellor candidate in the federal elections. So people know if they vote for the CDU in the last elections, or many last elections, Angela Merkel, of course, well-known politician, was always the Spitzenkandidat or the Kanzlerkandidat in Germany. And people knew if the CDU would come into power, then she would be the chancellor.
Yeah.
So it's kind of that's the idea, huh? And this is something not only typically in Germany. I mean, this is really a feature, I would say, of most parliamentary democracies we know. So this is Germany. The same works in Italy, Poland, UK. So people know what they can expect because, like in these parliamentary democracies, the government is directly elected by the parliament, unlike the US or France or Mexico, for instance, where you have
which are presidential systems, and you vote directly for your head of government.
Yeah, and unlike also the European institutions, which is neither a parliamentary nor a presidential system. And I think here the trouble is starting, but maybe we can come to this in a second. Yeah, so you said before that this system now seems to be, or is in practice at the European level.
The Spitzenkandidat.
Exactly, the Spitzenkandidat process. The reason is that there was a treaty change in 2009. Or came into force, into 2009 with the famous Lisbon Treaty. And in that treaty, there was a slight change in the wording and with respect to how the president of the European Commission shall be elected. And there it says, I quickly read that in Article 17, paragraph 7, it says, taking into account the elections of the European Parliament and after having held the appropriate consultations, the European Council, acting by qualified majority, shall propose to the European Parliament a candidate for President of the Commission. So the important sentence is here, taking into account the elections of the European Parliament.
Right. Whatever that means.
Exactly. Whatever this means. But this has been kind of like the idea. And the first elections after this treaty change was then in 2014. Then we had the elections in 2019. And now we have the elections next weekend. So that's why this Spitzenkandidat process has been around.
Right. I still have one question, though, when thinking about the term. Why is it in German?
Yeah, this is a brilliant question. Actually, I was looking into that a bit, and I, to be honest, didn't find a clear answer. What I, though, found out is that in 2014, there were two powerful men in the European Union. It was Jean-Claude Juncker and Martin Schulz. And Martin Schulz, being a German, they agreed to hold to this principle. At the same time, there was also the administrative boss of the European Parliament, who was also a German guy. He was called Klaus Welle. And what I read is that somehow this term entered into the jargon of Euro English.
Because the official translation in English would be lead candidate.
Yeah, exactly.
But it just sounds so much nicer and professional and Eurocratic to say Spitzenkandidat.
Yeah,
it feels like you know what you're talking about.
Yeah,
it feels powerful.
That's true.
I like it.
Although I'm actually surprised it's still around, because it's quite difficult to pronounce, even I think for a German, like Spitzenkandidat, a lot of like consonant tones and so.
Yeah, I've been practicing for at least a few days.
Well done.
Yeah. Okay, so you've told us what the Spitzenkandidaten procedure is. Also, Spitzenkandidaten is a plural of Spitzenkandidat. That's something I do remember from my German lessons, because there is more than one. And I want to know who the current candidates are. Who are the lead candidates in these elections?
Yeah, and that's a brilliant question. And my answer will already highlight the trouble with this whole process. But let me start with the easy part, okay? So the biggest group in the European Parliament are the Conservatives, which are called European People Party, the EPP.
Center right.
Exactly, and they decided to stick with a running system, so to say, with a running machinery, which is Ursula von der Leyen. She is the sitting Commission president, also part of the EPP.
Also German, coincidentally.
Exactly. I mean, she is German, exactly, and why she is there, we can talk about in a second. And they said, well, we put her on our list. Although actually, she's even not running for the parliament. The EPP says when we are winning the elections, we try to keep her the post, you know. Then we have the second largest group is the socialists, the social and called SND group, the Socialists and Democrats, center left, and they proposed Nicolas Schmidt from Luxembourg, currently a commissioner in the current EU Commission. That's the easy part, and now I'll make it brief, because we have the Liberal group and we have the Greens group, Greens EFA they're called, and the Liberals called Renew Europe group. They decided to elect several lead candidates. The Liberals have 3, the Greens have 2 from different countries. The left, they have 1 candidate, great, and the 2 very right-wing groups in the European Parliament, the Identity and Democracy group, ID, and the European Conservatives and Reformists, the ECR, they don't even, you know, kind of like bothered.
They don't have a candidate.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. So it is already, already in practice, it is complicated, because let's talk about the Liberals. They have 3 candidates, a German, Marie-Agnes Strack-Zimmermann, a member of the German Parliament, Sandro Gonzi from Italy, member of the European Parliament, and Valérie Hayer from France, also a member of the European Parliament. So the question is then, let's assume the Liberals would win. You have 3 lead candidates. What does that mean for becoming next Commission president? I don't know.
Yeah. Well, how are they going to split the Commission presidency?
Well, but this is how it is.
Okay. So just to recap then, we have 7 European political parties, each of whom has put forward one or several names as lead candidates or Spitzenkandidaten for the post of Commission President. Well, except for the 2 extreme right parties, Identity and Democracy and the European Conservatives and Reformists, which have not put forward any names.
That's correct.
Okay, all right. So why do we have this very complex process in place? Why do we need to do it this way?
Well, the idea was, I think, when this was introduced actually a long time ago in the Lisbon Treaty, and even earlier on put into the text of the European Constitution that never actually came into force. The idea was, I think, to first of all provide some personalization of European politics in a way that people not only vote for a list. So that brings also the EU closer to the people. We all know that politics works better with faces. So people like to vote for faces and just instead of like lists or just topics. And also, of course, it is also a part to legitimize the work of the European Commission, because the European Commission, and I think this is really where the center of the debate should be around, is at the moment still like a technocratic institution. And the idea was, okay, if you vote in the European Parliament, indirectly be then also deciding on the president of the European Commission, that also kind of like helps you maybe to decide on which policies might be, proposed by the European Commission.
Yeah. Well, I have to say that so far it kind of makes sense to me, because we are telling me we have elections all over Europe, and the citizens are given the opportunity to vote for a political party who then gets a number of seats in the European Parliament. And the party that gets the largest number of votes is also arguably the party that has the largest share of seats in the Parliament. And the person or people that they have nominated as their lead candidates are therefore going to be at the helm of the European Commission. To me, that sounds kind of democratic. It sounds kind of okay. But my question is, does the process of the Spitzenkandidat actually work? And this is a loaded question because I know that it doesn't always work. But I would like you to run us through some examples.
Yeah, the examples are so far very limited because we had 2 examples. As I said before, the first time this principle was put into operation was in 2014. And in 2014, it was an interesting time and also a different time than we have today in the European Parliament. Let me just recap. We have these 2 big groups, the center-right and the center-left group, the EPP and the SD. And in 2014, before the elections, but also after the elections, they both had together a majority, an absolute majority of more than 50%. This is different today. Today, they don't have this anymore, and we have overall smaller groups. And why this is important? Because in 2014, the EPP decided that Jean-Claude Juncker, actually a very kind of like famous European politician because he was a former prime minister of Luxembourg, like a long-term president of the Eurogroup, which is a group of all the countries that have the euro. He was the candidate of the EPP, and the SND actually nominated Martin Schulz, a long-sitting president of the European Parliament. So I would say 2 big shots,
Right.
And these 2 big shots, they decided, we'll stick with this Spitzenkandidat process, and whatever is going to happen, we'll stick with it. So if the EPP gets the most votes, it's going to be Jean-Claude, and if it's the SND, Martin will be the next Commission president.
Right. So both of them knew that their parties had a huge advantage over other parties, so they come up with this process where they basically agree on very basic rules of the game, which is whoever gets a larger share of seats will also get to rule the European Commission, which we both covet. Our parties are both interested in. So let's just have this agreement in principle that's how we're going to play.
That's more or less what happened, yes.
Okay, and then because Schulz is German and Jean-Claude Juncker speaks German, because it's one of the official languages in Luxembourg, they decided to put forward a German term, Spitzenkandidat.
Well, that I don't know, but somehow maybe this is part of the reason, yeah.
Right.
Well, and then in 2014, the EPP, so the Conservative, got the most votes. And in the end, the heads of states, they basically followed this arrangement, and they decided to propose Jean-Claude Juncker as the next president of the European Commission, and the Parliament approved, and we were all happy.
Right.
Yay. So the process was basically completed, and this...
Member states didn't really have any complaints about Jean-Claude Juncker becoming the next
probably they didn't have any
president.
complaints, but also they didn't have too many choices.
So success for the Spitzenkandidat.
And for European democracy, at least this is how it looks like. Exactly. So 5 years later, in 2019, the situation is a bit different. And one main outcome, I must start here with the outcome of the election, is that the 2 big groups, which I mentioned before, the Conservatives and the Social Democrats, they don't have anymore an absolute majority, which makes already the decision process afterwards a bit more complicated, because now you need to have like an agreement of several groups. And they decided they were again candidates. Franz Timmermans was the candidate of the SD, the Socialists, and Manfred Weber, candidate of the EPP. And the EPP also secured the largest share, but for different reasons, the heads of government did not like him, or at least there was not a majority, or so not all of them agreed to propose him, and they came up with a surprise candidate in form of Ursula von der Leyen, back then the German Minister of Defense.
Right.
And proposed her instead of Manfred Weber to the European Parliament.
Okay. So in this case, it was, as you said, it was the other way around. You had a very clear lead candidate in both parties. The elections take place. The center-right party, the EPP, comes first in the polls. But member states, in this case, they don't like the lead candidate, Manfred Weber, and they decide to put in the game a wild card, which is Ursula von der Leyen. She gets elected as Commission president, and the whole Spitzenkandidat process gets trashed.
Kind of, yes. And I think you quickly said then what happened. Indeed, she gets elected. So, of course, one possible outcome could have been that the parliament rejects her. But it seems like, and this is where I think where one of the core problems is that, of course, in this election or following these elections, it is a bit more complicated than just deciding on one post. So the EPP, so the Conservatives and the Social Democrats, they didn't have a majority anymore. So now they had to be different, more factions, more groups in the parliament to be made happy. And then it seems like that they were not anymore, they couldn't stick anymore to their promise they made before. And in the end, this whole system crumbled.
The process worked in 2014 when it was originally conceived. It didn't work in 2019, where the process was, in a way, bypassed by member states, although somebody could argue not really, because member states, according to treaties, they still have the final say as to who they will nominate for Commission President.
Absolutely.
So it makes me question what we are really voting for when it comes to the European elections and when it comes to the Spitzenkandidaten process. Because even though in theory it sounds all very nice, as in each political party will put forward a name and put a face on their lists as to who might lead the European Commission. And even though citizens might feel that they are voting for the specific candidate or candidates, what happens in practice is that at the end of the day, it is their elective representatives in each member state, the head of government of their member states, that will negotiate who in the end will be nominated for Commission President. So, in my opinion, I think that what we're really voting for in these European elections is not for a Spitzenkandidat or a lead candidate or the next Commission President. We're actually voting for the composition of the next European Parliament, which will represent directly the citizens of each member state. I think that's something that should be very clear to all of us. But then it makes me question why on earth we have this Spitzenkandidat. Why do we even put this out there, or why are European parties telling us, hey, we still have something called Spitzenkandidat, and why are we also putting public money into organizing debates and into telling these candidates, put together a manifesto of ideas and sell us your vision for Europe, if at the end we don't know whether this will work or not?
You raised the important point here. Do we need this system at all? I mean, is this something that actually is helping the European project, if you want to say it, or is it something that actually is rather, confusing to the least, maybe even hurtful to the worst?
That's a very good question, and my guess is that it will depend who you really ask.
Yeah.
It seems to me that European political parties for the past 10 years have been pushing for this system to work. They will say, yes, we need the Spitzenkandidat. In a way, or at least the way they present it is, this is a way to link the choice that voters are making with the election of the Commission President. So they want to bring Europe closer to EU citizens, they want to engage them, they want to increase turnout, and they want to increase transparency. And here, I mentioned briefly turnout, but a fun fact is that since the first European elections took place in 1979, turnout has been decreasing steadily. It actually went back up in the elections in 2019, but and it seems like European citizens are willing to vote again in big numbers in the elections next weekend. But for many years, turnout was kind of low. In a nutshell, I think that political parties will agree that the Spitzenkandidat is something that should be kept. And actually, last year in 2023, the European Parliament proposed a binding deal with the European Council on how to elect the Commission President. So basically formalizing the Spitzenkandidat process. And here they said something along the lines of the process should depend on securing a majority in Parliament in line with the Lisbon Treaty, so that backroom deals at the European Council are put to a stop. And I find this really funny because actually, if you want to comply with European treaties, well, of course, European treaties don't say, hey, European Council members engage in backroom deals, but by giving them the possibility to decide without specifying who will be the person nominated for Commission President, in a way, they are free to do whatever they want and to choose however they see fit the next nominee for Commission President. So to a certain extent, these words from the European Parliament sound a little bit void to me because the European Council is doing precisely what the treaties allow them to do. In my opinion, the Parliament is here the one trying to disrupt things and trying to have a bigger say in these matters. Not that that's a bad thing, but it sounds to me like it's a very long shot.
And funnily enough, if you read again the treaty, it says, after having held the appropriate consultations, the European Council shall propose. So, I mean, if the wording of having held the appropriate consultations doesn't not include backroom deals, I don't know. I mean, this is probably something that how do you decide on an important person? I mean, of course you have a backroom deal. I mean, whether you like it or not. But this is I think this is the European Parliament. Of course, tries to change here a system that is not in their favor, so to say, by this wording.
That's right. This means that, of course, for European member states, for the European Council, the idea of having a process like the Spitzenkandidat in place is less convincing. They want to keep having a strong say on who the next president of the European Commission will be. Because in a way, the whole idea behind the European Union is member states giving a supranational entity, in this case the European Union, with its many institutions, some powers to decide on their behalf. So they want to have a say at least on who is going to be at the helm of the most powerful EU institution. And here it's very interesting because if the Spitzenkandidaten system were to be in place, then the process of electing the Commission President would become sort of automatic, right? There would be no kind of control on the part of member states because the lead candidate of the party that gets the highest number of votes in the European elections automatically, in quotation marks, becomes the Commission President, provided that the Parliament still ratifies it. So in a way, it gives the Parliament both a say in who it should be and then a say in ratifying this person. So in a way, this sounds very cheeky to member states, at least. Of course, the Parliament still has a say because even in the current system, even if things were to stay the way that they are, they could always reject the candidate proposed or nominated by the European Council. But to my knowledge, I don't think that has happened yet. And even when Ursula von der Leyen was thrown in as a wild card and sidestepped Manfred Weber, who had been the lead candidate and who nobody wanted to be Commission President, the Parliament still confirmed Ursula as the Commission President by a very narrow margin, apparently one of the lowest ever recorded, but still confirmed her. A question I have is who is asking citizens? Because all of this is allegedly done in the name of democracy, in the name of citizens, in the name of transparency. So I looked around on the internet because you can find any kind of information or misinformation online. And I found...
I hope you found the good information.
Well, what I found is a 2019 post-electoral survey conducted by the European Parliament. And they asked respondents why they voted in the European elections in 2019, when, let's remember, the Spitzenkandidat process did not work. And 8% of respondents say that they voted in order to influence the choice of the European Commission President, which I interpret as a tiny nod to the Spitzenkandidat process. And this apparently question was also asked in 2014, and this 8% of people responding represents an increase of 3 percentage points. So more people are actually voting because they want to have a say in the choice of the European Commission President. But of course, there are other reasons that are more important.
But on a super low level.
It's a very low.
8% is like nobody, basically.
It's almost nothing. It's probably all the respondents in the survey that actually work in an EU institution and kind of understand this a bit more deeply. We are still stuck with a system, I guess, that to a large extent is informal because it's not established in any EU treaty. It's not fully endorsed by member states. And it seems that only European parties have a real interest in it. I still think, though, that even if the system is never formalized, European political parties still have a lot to gain from it. Because even if their candidates are not taken into account as nominees by the European Council, it's still a way to showcase who these political parties believe are their big shots, big shots at other top jobs in the EU. And then sort of set the stage for negotiations of top jobs that might include not necessarily the European Commission, but for instance, the position of President of the European Parliament, the position of Secretary General of the Council, the head of the Council, the head of the European External Action Service, which is like basically the foreign ministry of the EU, and of course the College of Commissioners later on in the mandate. So I think they still have some things to gain. And one of the clearest examples was in 2019, two of the lead candidates of the two other major parties, Franz Timmermans with the Socialists and Margaret Vestager with the Liberals, they both, none of them got to be Commission President, but they became Executive Vice Presidents of the Commission with two important portfolios, green and digital. So I guess their campaign was not in vain.
Yeah, maybe. Although other people were appointed by surprise and were not Spitzenkandidaten in 2019. So again, I would say also in 2019 it was a bit of a mixed message here. I just wanted to maybe to come back quickly to a point you said before, which I think probably is something we should maybe quickly discuss before we come to the conclusions, of this whole thing, which is. And I think we touched it several times. In the end, this whole process, you can sell it, of course, as an aspect of bringing European democracy closer to the people. However, you can, of course, also sell it as a story of power struggle between two institutions, namely the European Parliament and the European Council. And you said it before, that, of course, the European Parliament wants to have a larger say in policy making and wants to take away some of the competences that are held by the European Council. And you also said, very rightfully so, that the history of the European Union, it's very much represented in this whole process, because you said, well, the idea of the European Union is that countries give away powers to a supranational body and then they decide something for them in common. But this came always from the heads of states, so and so this European Parliament was added later. And I think there we have this whole confusion of people, and rightfully so, that project something in the system, and here we use the Spitzenkandidaten, which actually is kind of like a bit of an alien aspect to that, because the Spitzenkandidaten process works super well in a parliamentary system, but in a system that is like hybrid, not even sure what it actually is, the European system, it looks nice on paper, but in the end, it's weird. It is also a part of this power struggle between the European Parliament and the Council. And so maybe we should also, let's say, derate some of the statements of the European Parliament and say, well, yeah, sure, it's about democracy, but maybe it's also a bit of like, you guys want to just have a bigger say in European politics, which is fair enough, but...
yeah, that wouldn't sell very well, though.
No, of course it wouldn't sound very well. But I mean, you could even sell it like that, because, I mean, in the end, you said in the beginning, the European Parliament is the only directly elected body of the European institutions. Of course, we are all voting for our heads of states, and then they go to Brussels and they decide something, or they endorse certain politics or policies. But you could even say that, saying like, we want to have a bigger say in European politics because we as the European Parliament are directly voted by you, the people, which is fair enough, But then the system, which was thought of by some of the parliamentarians, as we saw it in practice, works sometimes, it doesn't work sometimes. And it makes also total sense, in my opinion, that it doesn't work, because the European Commission is not the government of the European Union. It is kind of like this weird body that is, partly dependent, but also partly very independent, and is not a government in most parliamentary democracies in the world that directly gets its power from the parliament. And if the parliament doesn't like the government anymore, they can vote the government out of power. They can change it. And here, not really, no? I mean, yes, there are possibilities to dismiss the entire commission. That it's not like it's in countries where they have a clear opposition and a clear governmental group. It's different. And that, I think, also is the reason where all confusion comes from.
And this makes me wonder whether it wouldn't be better to just abandon the Spitzenkandidaten process, because to me it generates more confusion. I remember distinctly in 2019, I was still getting acquainted with the intricacies of EU policies and politics, and I was following all the debates between the lead candidates at the time, actually really thinking one of them will be the next Commission president. This is so relevant.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, none of them got a shot at the big job.
Yeah.
And I was not a citizen of Belgium at the time yet. So, of course, I couldn't vote. But even not being able to vote, I still felt cheated to a certain extent because I really thought that this was going to amount to something. And then at the end of the day, it didn't. And it felt just confusing and just added to the sense of, backroom deals is how you appoint a Commission president. When in reality, backroom deals, if you will, I know this is not technically correct, but they are part of the freedom that the European Council member states have in appointing the Commission president. So this adds some noise to a process that is already complicated enough. So in my humble opinion, the only way that a process like the Spitzenkandidat could work going forward is if you make it institutional, if you operationalize it, and if you get all the EU institutions and member states to agree on how to do it. But that would be very complicated because it will probably require opening up the treaties or forging complex interinstitutional agreement of sorts where you define how the Council should take into account the results of the European elections, which would take probably a lot of work, and I'm not sure to what extent it will be meaningful. I'm just wondering and thinking out loud here, wouldn't it be just easier and simpler and actually democratic and transparent if European citizens were to vote directly for the Commission president, like a transnational election just for the position of president of the European Commission? I feel that if we're talking about representativeness, transparency, power to the people, proximity to citizens, what could be closer to that than actually voting directly for president of the European Commission?
I think I would partly agree with you on abandoning the process, or at least not abandoning, but at least maybe being a bit more honest on the parliament side.
Honesty.
To say like, look, we
currency.
We have this process, but if people are getting pumped up and saying, yeah, we want to vote for this person to become the next president, and and it's already not a sexy topic, but when you then disappoint people afterwards because nobody is actually like following up that process, then I mean, what are you voting for? Indeed. And you said we could vote directly for the Commission president. Why not? Sounds like an idea that I think we should discuss. However, I would also be careful to do this like as a change on its own. I think that would probably mean and could also be done only in a bigger treaty change. So then we would open up the entire package and would rethink really how we want to legitimize European institutions from ground up. And this could be one outcome. Not sure this is the outcome people would prefer, but it could be one outcome. But you said before, treaty changes are inherently difficult. We need to convince all the member states to agree. And and of course, taking away potentially some of the power from the council and bring it to either to the people or directly or to the parliament, of course, it's going to be a tough sell, I guess. There needs to be some horse trading there happening. And to be honest, I'm a bit unsure what to do with this process in general. I think it's a nice idea. And also, if it were to work, it would be not bad, kind of like, because it would help the European democratic project. However, I think in its current form, it is just not very believable. The parliament is not really electing the commission. It's just kind of like approving the commission. And there's not really a government and not really an opposition group in the parliament. This process is put on top on something and they don't really match together. So in the end, the parliament really cannot make sure that they actually stick to their own promise, and then, I'm not sure what we're going to take from that. And I think I'm a bit pessimistic actually for this election. I would be not surprised if most of the people really never heard of any of the lead candidates in this election.
Maybe for the better. But in any case, none of this should keep us from voting in the next European elections taking place on 6 to 9 June across the EU member states.
I think this is already a very powerful tool, these elections, because the European Parliament really has a lot to say. Maybe not on the Spitzenkandidat much, but for sure on politics and policies, which is very, very important.
So engage, vote, and keep listening to EU Untangled. Thank you, Alex.
Thanks.
Vielen Dank for listening to EU Untangled. This is your host, Victor Aguilar.
And this is your host, Alex Roth. So for more content, you can follow us on all the important, I would say, social media platforms. I think we are on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and Mastodon as well.
And of course, you can find EU Untangled on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your podcast.
And don't forget to write maybe something positive and give us a rating, because that helps others to find this podcast.
And make sure you visit our website, where you can find all of our past episodes, untangled-podcast.eu.
And finally, we are always happy for any kind of feedback. So drop us an email, mail@untangled-podcast.eu. We would really love to hear from you.
Auf Wiedersehen.
Tschüss.
Alex, this whole episode about the Spitzenkandidaten and where this name comes from really got me thinking. If we stick to any kind of lead candidate procedure, shouldn't we come up with a better name? I mean, like, honestly, why does it have to be a German term? So
I don't know either. I mean, I told you, I have no idea where this comes from.
Okay, so my theory is that this is because there are no better ideas in a major European language. So I think it's our duty as European citizens to come up with some alternative names for the next EU elections.
Sound better in Spanish. Come on.
Yeah, exactly. We could just call, instead of Spitzenkandidat, we would say, just, I don't know, like El Ganador.
Is that the guy? Is that the winner?
That's a winner, yeah.
And literally, what is the Spitzenkandidat in Spanish?
Candidato punta?
Not so cool. No.
I don't know. Look, also,
okay.
I have no idea what they call it in Spain. Remember, I'm Mexican, so I've never been in this environment before.
But you were the only Spanish speaker here in the room, so I had to.
Okay. Yeah. Do you have any ideas?
Well, not really, to be honest. I would actually stick with the English term. I know I'm a boring person. I just take it whatever. I mean, why not lead candidate? I mean,
are you kidding me? Lead candidate?
Yeah, why not?
That's never going to stick around. How about the champ?
The champ sounds maybe a bit too sexy for EU politics, no?
Okay. How about the GOAT?
Why the GOAT?
The greatest of all times?
The greatest of all times. That's a bit, so abbreviations, that could be better. EU politics loves abbreviations.
Yeah, exactly. The GOAT, the EU GOAT. How about that?
EU GOAT.
But hey, look, even if we just wanted to stick to the original German, like, since apparently the people who came up with this idea were German, or at least German speaking, and our current president is also German, why don't we just stick to a sexier German name, something that everybody likes, like a Spitzenkandidat?
I love that one.
You do?
Now I'm hungry also.
Look, I think I'm hungry too, man. Like, if that were the term, I would answer in the poll. The reason I'm voting is because of the Spitzenkandidat.
Guten Appetit.